Hello everyone, and welcome to another Star Rail lore video. Today, I'll be going over the 9 flagships of the Xianzhou Alliance and their history. This lore is given to us through a variety of character stories, trailers, readables, and more. Also, this video does contain spoilers for the quests listed on screen now, so if you haven't done those, you have been warned. Anyways, let's move right on and get into the video. To start off this video, I want to talk about the only flagship of the Xianzhou that we have visited so far, the Xianzhou Luofu. This flagship travels between densely populated interstellar regions, helping worlds ravaged by the denizens of the Abundance, with occasional help from the IPC as well. Even though there is less warfare at the moment, the Cloud Knights of the Luofu still travel to other planets to help out when they can. On board the ship, the Ten Lords Commission and its judges also remain on guard for any elixir seeker pursuing everlasting life. Now, each of the Xianzhou flagships has an Arbiter General of the Hunt, a High Elder of the Vidyadhara, and a Plague Mark of the Abundance. The Arbiter Generals are Emanators of the Hunt, gaining their powers directly from their path's Aeon, Lan. For the Luofu, the Arbiter General is the wise and brave Jingyuan, the Divine Foresight. Next, the Vidyadhara are a humanoid long-life species descended from Long, the deceased Aeon of the Permanence. The High Elders are the leaders of the Vidyadhara, and they live on 5 of the 6 remaining Xianzhou flagships. The High Elder of the Luofu is Imbiber Lune, successor of the Azure Dragon and commander of the Clouds and the Rain. This title formerly belonged to Dan Feng, and its power has been passed to his new incarnation, Dan Heng. This title will later pass to the new High Elder, Bailu, once she comes of age. Now, each of the High Elders are bound to guard one of the plague marks of the Xianzhou. These objects were initially given to the Xianzhou by Yao Shi, Aeon of the Abundance, who the Xianzhou Alliance now rejects and fights against. For the Luofu, the plague mark is the Ambrosial Arbor. Moving on though, it's time to get into the history of the Xianzhou Luofu. Since the Luofu is the only flagship we have visited so far, this will be the longest section of the video. Additionally, because the Alliance has existed for over 8,000 years, I'll only be covering events important to each flagship in their respective sections. Our first story of the Luofu takes us back around 800 years ago. At this time, the previous sword champion of Luofu, Jing Liu, would bring together a group of people from all different places and walks of life to create the High Cloud Quintet. This group consisted of Jing Liu, Jing Yuan, Ying Xing, Dang Feng, and Bai Heng. In their time together, they accomplished many great feats. They drove out the Borson of the Abundance that were invading Thalassa, they rescued the Xianzhou Yuque, they defeated the living planet Ketu Mirage, and so much more. However, the High Cloud Quintet would unfortunately fall apart after less than 100 years. In a battle against Shuhu, an emanator of the Abundance, Bai Heng would sacrifice her life. Soon after, Dan Feng, assisted by Ying Xing, would commit a great sin that came to be known as the sedition of Imbiber Lune. He attempted to use the Transmutation Arcanum to resurrect Bai Heng, while also allowing other races to become Vidyadhara. However, this plan backfired, and it instead released an uncontrolled draconic abomination onto Scale Gorge Waterscape. Fortunately, Jing Liu managed to subdue the beast, but she also developed Mara as a result of the incident. Ying Xing would also be transformed into an immortal being struck by Mara, eventually taking on the name of Blade. It's also worth noting here that Bai Heng and Bai Lu share a lot of similarities in terms of appearance, and it is implied that Bai Heng was eventually reincarnated to become Bai Lu. Getting into more recent time though, in year 8072 Star Calendar, a new war against the Abundance was fought by the Xianzhou, known as the Third Abundance War. Quick side note, the Star Calendar is the 12-month system used by the Xianzhou, with year 0 being where their fleet took to the stars. Anyways, the Xianzhou was about to face defeat in the war, but fortunately, its leaders were able to summon Lan, who descended onto the physical plane. They used their Lux Arrow to annihilate the denizens of Abundance and give victory to the Xianzhou, though this bombardment of Lux Arrows came with collateral damage. A girl named Yufei was one of the people killed as a result of the Lux Arrow, causing her friend, Dan Shu, to resent the eon she once followed. She would eventually go on to become one of the leaders of the Disciples of Sanctus Medicus, a group that followed the Abundance. A few decades later, during year 8100 star calendar, the events of the Luofu Trailblaze missions would take place. Before we arrived on the Luofu, Lord Ravager Phantilia would smuggle a Stellaron onto the Luofu and plant it within the Ambrosial Arbor. After being informed of a Stellaron burst on the ship by the Stellaron Hunters, we would arrive at the Luofu. Here, we would meet Tingyun, Yukong, Jingyuan, and many more characters. Eventually, the Stellaron within the Ambrosial Arbor would activate, reviving the tree. Phantilia would reveal herself soon after, having been possessing Tingyun this entire time. She would snap Tingyun's neck before discarding her body to return to her true form as a Heliobus. Later on, she would use the Ambrosial Arbor to create a new body for herself to fight Jingyuan and the Astral Express crew. Thanks to the teamwork of Jingyuan and Dan Heng's Imbibitor Lunae powers, we were able to defeat her. However, she still remains out there in the galaxy, as this body was merely stolen on a whim. Fortunately though, these events revealed Phantilia's name to the galaxy, as beforehand, she only orchestrated destruction from the shadows and tended not to fight. Sometime later, after Jingyuan had healed, the High Cloud Quintet would once again meet at Scale Gorge Waterscape. However, it would be a somber meeting, as many of the members are either Mara-struck or no longer remember their past selves. We are likely going to return to the Luofu at some point, but for now, that's the end of its story. Of course, this isn't the end of the video though, as we still have 8 more flagships to go over. As I said though, these sections won't be nearly as long as the Luofu. Anyways, our next flagship for today is the Xianzhou Fanghu, who is the only one of the remaining flagships to be governed firstly by the Vidyadhara High Elder. This High Elder is Glaciator Marum, successor of the Scaled Dragon and tamer of the Ebbing Frost, who watches over the Fanghu's plague mark, the Miniature Myriads. Of course, the Fanghu still has its own Arbiter General, that being the mighty and powerful Xuanquang, the Sage Queller. As suggested by the High Elder being in charge here, Vidyadhara are quite common on the Fanghu. They live in the multitude of aquatic locations aboard this flagship, including Claret Gleam Bay, Rainbow's Road Museum, Wild Shore, and their own alchemy commission. While these places all sound quite nice, seeing them can be quite difficult. The Xianzhou Fanghu is one of the most difficult to visit flagships of the Xianzhou fleet. You must have both a Xianzhou Alliance travel pass and a Fanghu travel pass, which must be applied for 2 to 3 months in advance. You also need a certificate of conduct, as well as a certificate of no criminal record from the IPC. While this process is quite extensive, it fortunately doesn't have to be done too often, as the passes remain valid for 20 years. However, the Fanghu briefly stopped issuing new travel passes due to the recent Third Abundance War. When Lan used their Lux Arrow to stop the denizens of Abundance, nearly 1/5 of the Fanghu's delves were destroyed. After some time rebuilding and recovering though, the ship opened up to visitors once more. Currently, the ship is moored at the Lanadi star system, a place with no terrestrial planets. As such, they will be safe from the denizens of Abundance or the Antimatter Legion. Unless unforeseen circumstances occur, they are expected to stay there for around 10 star calendar years. Moving on now, we have the Xianzhou Xuling, which is unique in its own way. While all of the Xianzhou flagships have arumatons, this ship is filled with them, but lacks the large amount of living beings seen on other flagships. In fact, not many people truly know where the Xuling even is, which is said to be normal. This does make quite a bit of sense when you think about it though, as this flagship is where trials are often held. Both the 10 Lords Commission and the 7 Arbiter Generals take part in these trials, meaning if a malicious party knew where they all were, they could wipe them out in one swift move. As such, it's for the best that this ship's location is kept a secret. Speaking of the Arbiter Generals though, the Xuling is run by the mysterious and fair Yo Wu, the Patina Justice. However, unlike the other flagships, there is no High Elder aboard the Xuling. There is likely a plague mark here, but it is currently unknown what exactly it is. Recently, the Xuling reported that it is business as usual aboard their ship, but as I said before, we don't know where it is. Jingliu and Luocha were supposed to be sent here for trial, but that didn't end up happening. Instead, they were redirected to a different flagship, the Xianzhou Yuque. Speaking of the Xianzhou Yuque, I think it only makes sense to talk about it next. The Yuque is the main exporter of the Xianzhou's Jade Abakai, and it is also the birthplace of the Divination Commission. This ship possesses powerful technology, including the Deca Light Reflection Barrier Matrix and the Cloud Peer Telescope. These devices allow them to peer into the depths of the stars and find their next destination in the cosmic sea. Of course, the Yuque has their own Arbiter General who fits the theme of the ship, the cautious and sophisticated Yao Guang, the Seer Strategist. They also have a High Elder as well as a Plague Mark, which actually ties into their exports. Their High Elder is Mons Grandis, successor of the Terrestrial Dragon and Ponderer of the Congealed Silence, who watches over the Yuque's Plague Mark, the Fallow Earth. As for how this Plague Mark ties into the Yuque's exports, the lithogenic ore of the Fallow Earth is essential for creating certain technologies on the Xianzhou. This ore is the source of the Jade Abacus technology found all around their flagships. Recently, the Yuque was trekking around the Giant's Arm star cluster, where the Cloud Peer Telescope captured signals from Lan's Lux Arrow. As a result, the Marshal of the Arbiter Generals issued Cloud Knights from the Yaoqing to investigate. Of course, the Xianzhou Yaoqing is also the next flagship I want to talk about. This flagship focuses on the Xianzhou's military operations, often going after the denizens of abundance. However, the operations are typically performed by the expeditionary fleet and will not endanger the main ship. Even so, many Cloud Knights always stand ready aboard the flagship. Speaking of the Cloud Knights, Su Shang served as a Cloud Knight aboard the Yaoqing before recently transferring to the Luofu. She says that the Arbiter General of the Yaoqing is more powerful than Jing Yuan, with a more aggressive pursuit against the abundance. This Arbiter General is none other than the fierce and swift Fei Xiao, the Merlin's Claw. Of course, like most other flagships, the Yaoqing also has a High Elder as well as a Plague Mark. Their High Elder is Calorum Venti, successor of the Winged Dragon and Sovereign of Storms, who watches over the Yaoqing's Plague Mark, the Lunar Embryo. Unlike the Fanghu mentioned earlier, it is relatively easy to visit the Yaoqing. They only require you to be a Xianzhou Alliance citizen or hold a Xianzhou Alliance travel pass or residence permit. Once here, you can tour the beautiful locations aboard this flagship, including Calorum Venti Pavilion, Verdant Harbor, and Red Fox Theater. As I stated earlier, the Arbiter General of the Yaoqing is in an aggressive pursuit against the abundance. In year 8098 star calendar, they announced victories against 4 large groups of abundance abominations. Between 2 of these fights, they moored in the Sakin Chadu star system for only 1 month before continuing on. Now then, out of all of the flagships of the Xianzhou fleet, the Xianzhou Zhuming is definitely the most unique looking. Since their departure several millennia ago, the craftsmen aboard the ship transformed it beyond recognition. Additionally, this flagship is also home to an amount of heliobi. However, thanks to the influence of Lan, the people here are able to coexist with heliobi while being free from their manipulation. Like the other flagships, the Zhuming has its own Arbiter General, that being the strong and righteous Hui Yan, the Flaming Heart. Additionally, it also houses the Last Elder and Plague Mark of the Xianzhou fleet. Their High Elder is Ardens Regia, successor of the Horn Dragon and wielder of the Heavenly Flame, who watches over the Zhuming's Plague Mark, the Primordial Flame. Like many other ships, the Zhuming is said to house many beautiful locations. These include Flame Disc Forge Palace, Firmament Temple, Radiant Zenith, Dragon Palace's Kitchen, and their own Alchemy Commission. Now, the lore of this ship mainly revolves around the heliobi and the war the Xianzhou fought against them. At one point during the war, the heliobi formed a red microstar to attempt to capture the Xianzhou fleet. To stop this, Lan set up a squad that would disassemble and weaponize the ship's auxiliary engines. They would then send this weapon straight into the red star, causing it to implode into a black hole. The defeated Helubai leader, the Flint Emperor, would be imprisoned, sentenced to serve as the power source for the Zhuming for the rest of their eternal life. Thousands of years later, the Zhuming, along with the Yaoqing and the Fanghu, engaged in warfare against Lord Ravager Selenova. Eventually, Selenova would board the Zhuming and request a ceasefire. She then asked the ship to change course and assist in attacking the homeworld of the Wingweavers, part of the Denizens of Abundance. Currently, the Zhuming is moored in the Stella Yamasaki star system, where they plan to remain for 10 star calendar years. Moving on though, the remaining 3 flagships in this video no longer exist, as they were destroyed in one way or another. Starting with the Xianzhou Cangcheng, it was said to be one of the most bustling of all Xianzhou's ships. It was home to the Cangcheng plum blossom, which has now gone extinct. 1800 years ago, in year 6300 star calendar, the Xianzhou Cangcheng would face its destruction. The flagship would be devoured by the activated planet Rahu, known as the Devourer of Worlds. However, the legacy of this flagship lives on, as at least one inhabitant of that ship survived. This would be none other than Jing Liu, who had lived there as a Cloud Knight. Before the Cangcheng was destroyed, she left for the Luofu, where she eventually became its sword champion and formed the High Cloud Quintet. As for Rahu, the living planet that devoured the Cangcheng, we know very little about it, except for the fact that Shuhu, the abundance emanator I mentioned earlier, was the one who brought it to life. Now, the first flagship of the Xianzhou fleet to be destroyed was none other than the Xianzhou Daiyu. Long ago, around year 1200 star calendar, the Daiyu was irreparably damaged and breaking apart due to the corrosion of a Denizens of Abundance race known as the Viscorpus. Qingzhu, the leader of the Daiyu, made the tough decision to sacrifice herself and her ship to end the curse of the Immortality Plague. During the campaign against the Viscorpus, the Daiyu would explode into pieces. The remains of the Daiyu would then end up falling on the ocean world of Thalassa, where it became the religious center of the native Isumoso people. The ship became known as a celestial palace, its inhabitants were revered as fallen gods, and the entire event became known as the Divine Fall. Eventually though, the Alliance would finally establish contact with the Insumosu. When they learned the truth, they no longer held a religious view of the Daiyu and its people, but they still celebrated Divine Fall Day. In fact, they added a new ritual to honor the people of the Daiyu. They would search the wreckage of the Daiyu for the remains of its people, before placing them into star skiffs and launching them into their star with a certain message inscribed. You should undo the ropes for drowned sailors. Don't cry. You can sail safely after my demise. The final flagship of today's video is Xianzhou Yuanqiao, which was also affected by the Viscorpus. Unlike the Daiyu though, they continued on for another 2,000 years. During that time, a civil war would ignite within the Xianzhou, plaguing each and every flagship with conflict. In year 3287 star calendar, the Xianzhou Yuanqiao would lose control. It would soon plunge into a red giant star and disappear completely, leaving no trace behind. This event became known as the Living Catastrophe, and the shock from both sides led to a ceasefire occurring soon after the ship's destruction. Anyways, that's pretty much it for the lore of the 9 flagships of the Xianzhou Alliance. The lore of each ship is super interesting and unique, and the destruction of the final 3 were equal parts interesting and unnerving. If you want more lore about Star Rail, I recommend my videos on the 10 Stonehearts and our destination after Penacony. With that said, I would love to hear what other bits of lore you'd like me to cover in the comments below as well. Anyways, that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Sources and further readings are also in the description if you want to check them out. I hope you all have an amazing day, and I'll see you all in the next video.